Not since the Rum Corps has the image of those who police us been lower. The Fitzgerald inquiry is making Queenslanders believe the unbelievable about their police force. In New South Wales, a spate of allegations has seen a former commissioner face trial and a deputy commissioner resign in disgrace. Tonight on Page 1, a report focusing on a state whose police force has been considered the cleanest. I'm Chris Masters. What you'll see tonight is the result of a detailed, lengthy investigation. It's a story which exposes a system rather than individuals, a story that shows how corruption can flourish rather than who are corrupt. And it's a story which reveals unspoken truths about how our police forces operate.
My father used to teach me that if you got lost, you ask a police officer. Next thing I know, I'm selling heroin for them.
They sell drugs. And it's all very disillusioning. You can't beat them. You've just got to look at them and smile and say, yes, sir, no, sir. 3 bags full, sir.
We've learned these people could be talking about most police forces because the police themselves have become an important component of the drug trade. We've learned that heroin corrupts police as surely as it kills addicts. And we've learned it all from what's occurred in Adelaide, Suppression City. Adelaide is our only state capital that wasn't built with convict labour. Perhaps that's why there remains a comfortable belief that South Australia continues to escape the blemish of crime and corruption. Adelaide is a law-abiding city. South Australians are law-abiding people. Each year, the local council quite literally paints a thin blue line down the main street for the annual John Martin Parade, and the people dutifully stand on their side of the line to allow the parade to pass. The people here respect the blue line. They trust the police. And yet the worst case of police corruption we Australians have been told about in recent times occurred not in Sydney or Brisbane, but here in Adelaide, no more than a few blocks away. On January 9, 1987, a middle-level drug distributor received about 6 ounces of heroin. Because of a court suppression order on his name, we can only refer to him as Mr. X. Mr. X was as flash as a rat with a gold tooth. 31 years old and a high-living addict with a steady access to his favourite drug and the astonishing wealth it facilitates. His supplier is someone we can name. 44 years old Barry Malcolm Moyse, the Chief Inspector of the Adelaide Drug Squad, and remarkably, the man chosen to head Operation Noah in South Australia. The question is, was it the individual Moyse who was most at fault, or the system itself?
Yeah, answered couriers, we've got a parcel for you.
The Moyse affair allows us a rare glimpse of some of the secret illegal procedures of drug squads. We put the system under scrutiny, beginning with the first meeting of Moyse and the so-called Mr. X. In August 1986, the dealer consigned a parcel of heroin to his own exclusive address and was arrested by Moyse's team.
Police.
What happened next is revealing of a common secret procedure of drug squads. Instead of charging the man, they decided to deal. Moyse and the man sought the privacy of the bathroom. Astonishingly, it was the drug squad chief who allowed himself to be searched for a tape recorder. They bargained, and it was agreed the dealer would be let free in exchange for information that would lead to the arrest of others in the drug trade.
It's a nice day to start again. Wow.
So Mr. X, the heroin dealer, became a police informant. His drugs would be able to reach the streets. His competition would be limited, but the trade would still flourish. Mr. X was being franchised to sell drugs in the same way McDonald's sells hamburgers. The police force would guarantee him a lucrative corner of the drug market, protecting him not just from arrest, but from competition.
We don't consider that the gathering of information by those methods is worth the risk to the police officers themselves. In fact, we'd be breaking the law to do it. And in fact, there is a proper means by which we can give some compensation to an informer under the right circumstances, but not to allow our own discretion to outrun our zeal, so to speak.
It's a nice day for a white wedding.
The next step was a giant step for Moyse to take. He arranged to meet Mr. X at this park. Police will often secretly supply drugs to informants for information, but now Moyse was asking for money too. So from now, the biggest supplier of drugs in Adelaide just happened to be the head of the South Australian Drug Squad.
You can't get bigger. Right? It was pretty big, man.
We interviewed the drug dealer, Mr. X. Suppression orders prevent us from identifying him, so the man you see is an actor. But the voice you hear is genuine.
How would anyone feel to have the sort of chief inspector of the drug squad supplying you dope to push on the street and giving you a green light to go ahead and do whatever you wanted? It was confident, you know. Who would think of boys supplying me smack to sell on the street? You know? No one would believe that, you know.
Few organisations would have greater access to illegal drugs than drug squads themselves. And here is how Moyse obtained them. Drugs seized during an arrest are held to be used as court exhibits. When the trial was finished, Moyse would sign the burn book indicating the drugs were incinerated, like this. But instead, they'd be diverted back to the street. So the police themselves became the city's major supplier, with Mr. X a franchised agent. But Moyse, with Mr. X, also organised the importation of drugs from Sydney. And in doing so, he had to alert others in the police force to some of the details of the operation.
I don't think he thought that anyone would dare look at him, especially the superiors. But I also think some of them up there were involved and knew of his activities.
So confident was Moyse, he used an intriguing public location for an early payoff. In this building is the Police Internal Security Division. Directly across the road is a former Adelaide brothel, which we'll show later to have a wider significance. Moyse and Mr. X met outside the adjacent hotel. Money and drugs concealed in paper bags were exchanged. There were many more such exchanges, and while Moyse appeared not to feel the danger, his partner, Mr. X, became increasingly nervous.
There was nothing stopping Barry Moyse putting a bullet in my head, resisting arrest, planting a gun on me or something like that. Or throwing 6-7 ounces on my carpet at my place and sending his own men over to bust me or setting me up. Who are they going to believe, me or their chief inspector? So I had to do something.
They met in the underground car park of Mr. X's luxury apartment building. With the tape recorder running in the boot of Mr. X's car, Moyse produced a range of drugs, a black market pharmacy. You have to continue to remind yourself that the man supplying the drugs was South Australia's top drug enforcement officer.
$3 grand. Fine.
The tape recording would prove critically important when the National Crime Authority later took Barry Moyse to court. This is the image South Australian viewers saw. South Australian suppression orders forced the masking of the Chief Inspector's identity. In doing so, what was also suppressed was a build-up of anger in the state about what had been going on. Mr. X, the major witness against Moyse, received an indemnity and a suppression order remains on his identity. The identity of Barry Moyse, drug squad chief and head of Operation Noah, was revealed to the public when he pleaded guilty to 17 counts of supplying drugs. He was sentenced to 27 years jail.
Sorry, all that you can say. Years gone by and still words don't come easily.
The majority of police in this state would hand up anyone that they thought was corrupting them. That is the genuine feeling of 99% of all policemen.
Forgive me for all that you can say.
If we get to one person involved in the distribution of heroin, the operation will have been successful.
Words don't come easily. Like forgive me.
In the streets of Adelaide, on the talkback radio programs, in the editorials, there was no outrage. The people of Adelaide were sorry, but they weren't angry. But then the people here had been told that the Moyse affair was a one-off. It had not happened before. It was unlikely to happen again. I don't believe the Barry Moyse affair was a one-off. One explanation for his foolhardiness and overconfidence could well be that police had been selling drugs here for years and getting away with it. And that's what we'll be dealing with in the second part of this report.
Oh, I can't wait.
In your time, what organisation would have been the biggest supplier of drugs in South Australia?
Oh, the SA Police Force. I mean, well, it's a bit crazy really, but it was all for free, wasn't it?
Who do you believe were the biggest distributors of drugs in Adelaide?
Well, I never saw anybody with as much drugs as this particular police officer.
Well, what's the point in having a drug squad if they're going to sell drugs?
Yes, we have here a tract about a dear girl who got onto heroin. And
over the past decade, a range of allegations has been made about police involvement in the drug trade. There is nothing unusual in that in any state of the land. Adelaide escaped a convict past, but there's no escaping a criminal presence. There is no escaping the drug trade anywhere in Australia. This is an ordinary garden variety marijuana plant. This one, we're told, is for home consumption. Its estimated street value, fully grown, is thought to be around $2,000. So you can imagine how much a whole crop of these would be worth. But what's interesting here is not so much the plant itself, but where it's grown. South Australia doesn't just produce the best red in Australia, but also the best green. Wine and marijuana have excellent export potential. And the marijuana industry, because it's highly profitable, is also highly corruptible.
They won't grow one, they'll grow 5 or 6 different areas. And you're looking at an investment of possibly 100,000 a crop. But then you're talking one crop will bring in 30, 40 million or 50 million. You know, a small crop, maybe 2, 3 million.
Is there good protection there too? I mean, police protection?
Yes, well, that's obvious. They might sink one just so the public can hear that, you know, we've caught one crop, one plantation, just for the media to put across that, yes, the drug squad's doing something.
In January 1987, Barry Moyse, Mr. X, and a South Australian businessman whose name is suppressed, allegedly conspired to grow a large marijuana crop.
1715.
An NCA surveillance operation designed to watch the businessman caught Moyse and the man at the property. It seemed an absurd risk for the drug squad chief to take.
Moyse said, yeah, I know that. I know I can't do it alone, but that's okay because I know what to do and I know how to handle it and I've got the right people in the right places.
The crop at Penfield was harvested and destroyed, but so many others reaping astonishing profits have been marketed. And Barry Moyse is not the only South Australian policeman to be investigated for helping protect the industry. Further, our own inquiries raise serious questions about other police who worked with Barry Moyse. Page 1 discovered this statement given to the Australian Federal Police. It alleges 2 other drug squad officers between December 1985 and March 1986 stole money and supplied drugs to one Peter Panagiotis.
I know that Peter was selling dope then for the cops, and he was also using, like I was, and when he wanted to get out, they wouldn't let him get out. So what they decided to do then was set him up, and now he's doing, I don't know, 7, 8 years, I think.
They produced this amount of heroin and asked how much I would get out of it. I told them obviously I couldn't say until I'd broken it up and whatever.
This woman, Kerry McDowell, claims one of the same policemen also offered her heroin for sale. And the transaction, she says, occurred right here at police headquarters, in interview room number 2. She says she handed over $100.
They both put it in their pockets and they expected more money from the heroin to come at a later date.
From within the local jails, within Adelaide's criminal subculture, Page 1 has heard many more stories of police stealing money and supplying drugs. Of course, jails are full of people who profess their innocence and have every reason to wish to discredit police. So what should be made clear is I'm not suggesting all drug squad police are corrupt. Indeed, even during the Moyse period, there were clearly many honest officers in the squad. Immediately before Moyse, there was a squeaky clean period. But before that, in the late 70s and early 80s, suspicions ran high, and the accusations of the day had a very familiar sound to them.
Democrat Robin Millhouse called for a royal commission into police corruption despite the report. But as far as the Attorney General's concerned, the tabling of the report in Parliament is where the matter rests.
They were allegations that money had changed hands in relation to the supply of drugs. There was one allegation that some drugs had been misappropriated once they'd been seized.
The inquiry was to be conducted by senior members of the South Australian Police Force. One of the team, David Hunt, is now South Australia's Police Commissioner. There were many witnesses to give evidence to the inquiry. One was a former heroin addict, Russell Clark.
I mean, it was every junkie's dream to get very cheap, large quantities of heroin. And so I said yes.
So did you give this police officer money?
Oh, yeah. Numerous occasions.
How much do you think?
Thousands. I don't know.
10,000? 20,000?
10, 15,000. It was hard to keep track because your whole life is in such a... It's like a whirlpool. You just... you're not there, you know. It's like you're dead, but you're still alive.
But nevertheless, are you certain about what you're saying?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, there's things that sort of become indelibly scarred on your memories, you know.
Russell's allegations are comprehensively dealt with in the investigator's report, although characteristically, identities of witnesses and police officers are suppressed. Some of the allegations are clearly outrageous and unsupported, but not all of them. Russell Clark's story was corroborated by others, including his grandmother, Jean Sheridan.
Russell told me that a policeman was coming to collect the money, $700, and which, when he walked in, I gave it to him in an envelope. And I think he rather queried that there must have been more. And in a way, he queried the envelope. And I just said to him, I said, it was one of my own envelopes. I said, Russell just threw it down on the table and said, give it to the man when he comes. And that's true.
It's been going on for years. It just gets covered up all the time. Someone makes noises about it and it's just covered up.
Did you know that this was going on with any other people?
Yes, yeah.
Why did you know that?
It was just common knowledge in the drug scene. You know, this smack came from the coppers, or this load of grass is back on the street that was busted last week, or this load of hash that was found is back on the street. I mean, it was just there all the time. It was common knowledge.
It's a very serious allegation you make. You admit that you were a junkie at the time. We all know that junkies are terrible liars.
Aren't they?
So why should we believe you?
Because I'm telling the truth. I'm not a junkie now. I've got nothing to hide.
This former South Australian detective, Mick O'Shea, also lends some support to Clark's story. What controls over drug exhibits were there in your time?
Well, there was simply none. And that's the short answer. Do you want the long answer or the short answer? There were none. And I had a number of incidences where I could see that drugs were being taken from the police property room and they were being given to informants for information.
When the findings came in, Russell Clark's allegations attracted the rather contradictory finding that there appeared to be a prima facie case against the police officer, but the evidence as a whole did not justify taking proceedings. So the 1982 inquiry determined there was no need for an exorcism after all. If there was evil in the police force, then the opportunity to eliminate it passed, and Adelaide returned to a more pious state. The sewer would continue to flow, but it would flow quietly. Adelaide is a gentle, charming city, but it does have a dark side. There is a history of vicious, ugly, and often unsolved crimes. The drowning of law lecturer Dr. George Duncan, the missing Beaumont children, the Truro murders, the mysterious homosexual murder gang, too many mysteries and too little resolution. The City of Churches could also be known as Suppression City. and suppression in anyone's language means cover-up. In the last chapter, we attempt to uncover the cover-up. South Australians are taught very young to trust their local policemen. The South Australian Police Force has a reputation as the cleanest state force in the land. South Australians have affection for the Blue Boys, the uniform police. They have pride in the police force as a whole, and the pride is largely justified. So proud are they when Don Dunstan sacked Police Commissioner Harold Salisbury in 1978, there was anger in the streets and 10,000 people gathered to voice their protest.
With the judiciary can be a first step towards dictatorship.
You can imagine that if thousands of people gathered in front of police headquarters in some other states, they could well be mistaken for a lynch mob. But here, they were demonstrating in support of the sacked police commissioner. The episode ended up costing the Dunstan government dearly and probably teaching them an important lesson. Ever since then, I suspect successive governments of South Australia have been very wary of taking on the police.
The South Australian Police Force does have a high regard, or highly regarded in South Australia. And if you do take on the police on a particular issue, say more dramatically, such as the dismissal of the Police Commissioner Salisbury, then obviously it's a matter that has fairly severe political repercussions.
There is another far more sinister explanation for why some senior public officials may be reluctant to tackle the issue of public corruption. Page One found and spoke with an Adelaide woman who worked as a prostitute in a prominent brothel. She asked us to disguise her identity. An actress has repeated what she told us.
There was a camera in a room. The manager told us that his boss liked to get film on particular clients. I don't know if he was supposed to tell us that, but he did. He got a bit drunk and a bit happy, and he flirted a lot with the girls. And he talked too much, I guess. But yes, there was a camera.
Inquiries in Queensland and New South Wales are spending millions searching for the blueprint of a city's corruption. In Adelaide, the task is far simpler. Here, the corruptors survive on blackmail.
It's good protection, isn't it? It's good to have up your sleeve. And if anyone tried to close you down or cause any sort of trouble, just send them a tape of an interesting little half hour.
So you're certain the camera was there? You say you saw it?
Yes.
Do you know that there were high-level clients? People like politicians, lawyers, policemen?
Yes.
Could we presume there are tape recordings of these people?
Yes, we could.
Others supported the claim, including this man who admits to running brothels in Adelaide for the past 15 years.
I know of certain operators that videotape clients with ladies because of the influential background or because they could be an asset to that particular operator.
Have you done this yourself?
No, I haven't.
How do you know that it's done?
I've been involved with some of the biggest operators here in South Australia.
What do they do with this information?
They use it to blackmail if they have to.
Do they blackmail?
If they want to get some, yes, they do.
The specific accusation of secretly videotaping clients relates to these premises. a former Adelaide brothel which operated for years in the city's main street, not much more than a long dropkick from police headquarters. Suppression orders and contempt laws prevent us from naming the man we were told ran the brothel, but what we can tell you is that it just happens to be the same unnamed South Australian businessman charged over drug offences with Barry Moyse. When we raised the issue with the police commissioner, he not just acknowledged the practice, but revealed that at the same time, another figure in the vice industry appeared to be up to the same tricks.
We've heard suggestions about that. One particular place, and that place was the subject of very strong police activity. And we did have information that this person taped incoming telephone calls, and I understand there were videotapes made of some activities within. Now, there's no evidence, though. There's never been any complaints that information was used for the purpose of blackmailing clients.
There wouldn't be any complaints,
no,
surely.
of course not.
South Australia has a more prudish attitude to its brothels than other states. Here, the parlours are discreetly landscaped into the suburbs. The sometimes Victorian values of South Australia demand that discretion because here, perhaps to a greater degree than anywhere else in Australia, careers and reputations depend on propriety.
I think for a while there, some politicians were actually denying that there were any brothels or prostitutes here. And those same politicians were actually clients at a lot of our brothels.
The power to blackmail guarantees the door stays open. And for the uninitiated, this is what the brothels look like behind the doors.
Got the heat turned on, and the windows down.
Your buddy mustache,
Telling everyone how good it feels.
The no sex sign exists for the sake of propriety. Sex is for sale, pretty much at the Perth, Brisbane and Sydney rate. And like in other states, there's evidence here that the industry is selectively enforced.
We have what we know as safe brothels, where you know you won't be raided, you won't be busted for prostitution. And if there are raids, you'll be warned.
Brothels have always been seen by police as a good source of criminal intelligence. The brothels supply information in return for protection, just as Barry Moyse's drug dealer supplied information to escape arrest. So to put it simply, do you think the brothel industry in Adelaide is franchised?
The only thing I can say is that certain places don't see the police and other places see them all the time.
We've heard complaints that the industry is selectively enforced, that some brothel keepers seem to get better treatment than others.
I'm not sure whether I can give an answer other than a qualified answer to all of that. It may or may not be true. It depends on whether or not we see a need to be able to keep an eye on and monitor what businesses are going on, even though we don't have the evidentiary provisions to make a prosecution in those cases. There's always a tendency, I suppose, to know your enemy.
But the link between drugs and prostitution doesn't end there. Prostitutes are conspicuous drug users. Brothels become trading posts for drugs. So when prostitution is protected, so too is the drug trade. And when brothel keepers have the power to blackmail, they have power to deal drugs with impunity. Do you believe the people who run the industry also sell drugs to the girls?
That's right.
You have personal knowledge of this? Direct knowledge?
I know of some places that supply drugs for instead of paying them wages.
So the brothel industry in Adelaide is franchised, and so too it appears is the drug trade. Since I've come to Adelaide, I've learned of a new expression they use here on the streets. Drug dealers who enjoy police protection are known as legal dealers, and the legal dealers, it appears, continue to operate to this day. In Barry Moyse's time, there were over 100 registered informants in South Australia, which means there were probably at least twice as many unregistered informants who were given a limited immunity. The most conspicuous informant, or legal dealer, was the so-called Mr. X.
They bust you and take, for instance, 8 ounces off you, put it in the books as burn, and then give it to me to push on the streets. So it was all sort of clear profit, because they didn't have to pay for it. And they charged the guy, and the guy would go in and do it in 10 years. And meanwhile, the stuff's getting moved. And this has been happening for years. It'll happen again. It's happening now, but on a quieter level, you know.
The Moyse affair reveals a great deal about the secret operational procedures of drug squads. The state squads don't have the powers to beat the drug traffickers legally. So quietly, a system is developed whereby some police plant drugs if an offender is too difficult to catch.
Hey, little sister, what have you done?
Some police give drugs to addicts in return for information. But the law can't admit to breaking the law, so the Brotherhood keeps its silence.
If indeed the practice does go on, then I certainly don't know about it, and on inquiries that I've made, particularly relevant to that, my officers in the line have advised me that either they don't know about it, or if it is going on, well, again, they don't know about it.
The South Australian Police Force has undertaken a serious house-cleaning operation since the Moyse revelations. The force boasts it's the most honest in the land, and nothing I've discovered necessarily disturbs that notion. The South Australian Police Force doesn't have the institutionalised corruption we are seeing in Queensland. But there is a problem, and according to the NCA, there's also been a lack of resolve and perhaps even a reluctance to properly confront the problem. But cleaning up the drug squad clearly isn't a job for South Australia alone. In Queensland, Commissioner Fitzgerald is beginning to reveal a similar pattern there. And there's further evidence indicating other Australian drug squads have similar secret procedures. In the same way that police franchised SP bookmaking in the 60s and prostitution in the 70s, so too, in the 1980s, is the drug trade franchised. It is obvious already that the contents of tonight's report will not be ignored. When we interviewed the Attorney-General last week, he announced the National Crime Authority was being invited to set up an office in Adelaide. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Police Commissioner Hunt chose today to announce an inquiry into allegations that have been around for some time, but about to be broadcast on national television. An obvious starting point for that local inquiry would be the insidious practice of blackmail we revealed tonight. But I wonder whether there should not be an inquiry with a wider brief, one that properly investigates the way drug squads operate, not just in South Australia, but across the nation. Because what this experience has taught me is probably what every drug squad detective has known for years, and that is that long ago illegal drugs entered the mainstream of Australian society, and long ago police gave up trying to find an ethical cure. They gave up trying to properly police the drug trade. So today the drug trade in Australia is not policed. At the very best, it is regulated.